Professor Tsadik, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's really interesting. We're talking about Iran. We're talking about the Persian community, and we're doing it like this is thematic. We're like coming out of Shushan. I guess we don't want to leave the story.
Right.
And when you think about the story, the history, for those who don't have any background in it, we have no idea about the community. We don't really have a sense of outside Purim, really, what's taken place since. So share with us a little bit about, the Persian community. When did the Jews first arrive in Iran, and sort of how did that community develop?
So the Jews lived in Iran from time immemorial, basically. We have some references to, in our sacred texts, right, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, references to exiles of Jews by certain kings of Assyria, Ashur, to certain places. One of those places is Media, Madai, Ari Madai, the cities of Media. We're talking about the 8th century before the Common Era,
Oh, wow.
BCE. So that's apparently the first reference to some Jews living in those places. Some scholars actually argue that a better starting point is that of the Babylonian exile, 586 BCE, where the Jews were exiled to Bavel, Babylonia, Iraq, nowadays Iraq more or less, in 538, when Cyrus the Great, the Persian Cyrus the Great, Koresh, in the Tanakh is known as Koresh, allowed Jews to return back to Zion. Some of them indeed ended up moving back to Zion, to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. However, others remained in Babylonia, and still others moved towards what we call today, what we refer to as Iran. So that might be another starting point. We're talking in any event about one of the oldest Jewish diasporas in the world.
What has been the relationship between the Jewish community and the host countries over the centuries? Like, how far have they advanced throughout the years and the ups and the downs?
Right. So as we're talking about more than 2,000 years of residence in Iran. So obviously there were good days and bad days, and indeed ups and downs and vicissitudes, no doubt about that, under different dynasties, different kings of a given dynasty. I can refer to some examples if you wish. For instance, during Sasanian times, for instance, 226 CE to 650, more or less, 651. So there were some good kings, righteous kings, as the Jews would call them, Malchei Chesed, referring to the Jews in a very positive way. And some of them even having some friendships with certain Jewish rabbis, as indeed documented in the Babylonian Talmud. At the same time, we know about certain cases of where Jews would be persecuted, would be seen as heretics, and so on and so forth. And this refers only to Sasanian times. We can move on and speak about Islamic days. Islam arrived in Iran in 651, more or less, mid 7th century, and from that time on, Islam is the state religion for the most part. For the most part, this is the state's religion. Under Islam, indeed, Jews fared variously. To begin with, the Jews would be seen as second-class citizens by Islam. And this concept is known as dhimma, protection. They would be granted the protection of the government, the Muslim authorities. At the same time, this protection would be granted to them as long as they follow certain laws, conditions, limitations. Number one, they would have to pay more taxes than the rest of than the larger society, Muslim society. This pertains to Christians as well, by the way. They would have to somehow distinguish themselves in a certain type of attire. Certain rulers, certain dynasties, some would sometimes force the Jews to wear a certain distinctive type of attire, a hat, a funny hat. Obviously, if you wear a weird hat, people would be able to recognize you and then stone you, spit on you, etc., etc. They would also be not be allowed to establish no synagogues. Only those synagogues that were in existence at the rise of Islam, mid-7th century, would be allowed to be renovated officially. On the ground, there were different things happening. In some cases, we know about new synagogues also established. Bottom line, this concept of the dhimma would mean subjugation of the non-Muslim believers in one God. People of the good, people of the book, Jews were included in this particular case. I can move forward to the beginning of the 16th century when a new dynasty took over Iran, the Safavid dynasty. That was a Shiite dynasty. And Shiite Islam would be imposed on Iran from the 16th century on. Some unique characteristics pertaining to Shiite Islam is the concept of impurity of non-Muslims. This concept is known as najasa in Arabic or najasat in Persian, meaning certain certain entities, including non-Muslim believers, are seen as impure, whose touch defiles the Muslim believer. We know about certain cases when Shiite religious scholars, Shiite ulama, would not allow the people of the book, Jews included, to go outside in rainy days, snowy days, because in Shiite Islam, water transmits pollution. So if the water touches the Jew and then touches the Shiite would be defiled. As such, all that would mean one thing. It would mean isolation, basically, within Iranian society. They would be seen as outcast in many respects, as one scholar refers to them.
How does, if you're consistently second-class citizens, doesn't the infrastructure not support population growth? Isn't there a an impetus to leave, an impetus to assimilate? So how does the Persian community stay this strong for that long?
Right. So indeed, some of them left Iran. We know about that. Some Jews left Iran. At the same time, interestingly enough, some other Jews did arrive in Iran. I believe that their secret of survival is basically their adherence, very strong adherence to Judaism. Despite all odds and pressure, and sometimes even massacres and tough periods, there were good periods, no doubt. But despite the tough periods, Jews decided to remain Jewish, to stick to their Jewishness. I believe that it has something to do with the fact that they did have contacts with the outside world, meaning as opposed to what scholars and the common wisdom is viewing Iranian Jews as remote, as distant, as cut off, isolated, segregated from the rest of the world, rest of world's Jewry. I would argue, and I developed this issue in one of my recent books, I believe that they were not as cut off as people may think.
That's an amazing phenomenon, how the adherence to one's faith tradition internally, in addition to the recognition that you're not alone in the larger sort of Jewish population. Those are tremendous ingredients, I think, if we explored them in terms of really what is the secret to our success in exile in general. But things started to change in the 70s. And if you can take us through that a little bit, what happened in the 70s that led to this, I guess, I would know it as a bigger exodus. I don't know if it is or not. I guess I would ask you, you're the expert. Like, was there something that took place that led to a normal than usual exodus out of Iran that really created all the different Persian communities across the world today?
Right. So I would take you a little bit back, to the 19th century, early 20th century. Iran, like some other places in the region, goes through modernity, meaning the Pahlavi regime ruling over Iran between 1921-25 to 1979 basically emphasized nationalism, Iranian nationalism, more than anything else, and it came at the expense of Islam. Meaning the Pahlavi, the regime, the Shahs, the last Shah everybody knows is of the Pahlavis. He was the second ruling king, Shah of that dynasty. They emphasized the fact that everybody living in Iran, speaking the Persian language, residing on that soil, is part of one nation, the nation of Iran. As such, he would find his roots, the nation's roots, earlier than Islam, in pre-Islamic days. And all that was good for the Jews and other minorities, because from now on, a Jew could be a Jew. Nobody would bother him. The Shah, the king, the ruling authority, didn't really care much whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim, whatever. as long as you are part of that community and you are contributing to the economy, etc., etc. In many respects, that was a major window of opportunity for Jews, and Jews increasingly participated in that window of opportunity. That was an era of a major economic boom. It was I guess, in many respects, too fast of an economic boom leading to the revolution in 1979, but Jews were able to really partake in that window of opportunity. They did contributed to the economy of their own country and became successful. All that was abruptly really changing in 1979. I guess it was not as abrupt as one may argue. From the early 70s, Iran goes through major crisis, economic crisis more than anything else. Major demographic problem was also taking place. And all that ended up, and many other reasons, which I can't really elaborate on right now, led to the revolution. There was a variety of groups within Iranian society that felt that the Shah should be overthrown. And that was indeed what took place for some 2 years or so. There were major demonstrations, strikes, etc., leading to the downfall of the Shah, Pahlavi Shah. And this led not immediately to a major move of Jews out of Iran. Earlier on, the situation was not completely clear. Obviously, the fact that Khomeini, the leader of the revolution, was known as not how should I say that, not necessarily as a very pro-Zionist person. He was anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, every now and then coming up with anti-Jewish statements. At the very beginning of his most significant book, most well-known book, Velayat Faqih, first page, he speaks about how the Jews fought against Muhammad back in the 7th century. And from that time on, it would develop this theme later on. From that time on, they keep on bothering Islam and Muslims. One of the most significant figures in the Jewish community in Iran, Habib al-Ghanayan, that was his name, a major philanthropist, the originator of the plastic industry in Iran, a very wealthy person that gave money to Jewish causes, to Muslim causes, a very Iranian figure who was not in Iran during that time, decided to come back to Iran. Some people say that he was told, you better stay outside Iran, but he said, nobody's going to touch me, I'm fine, I did nothing, etc., etc. He arrived in Iran and he was executed.
Wow.
And yeah, he was executed. A few reasons were given. He was seen as a Zionist. He was seen as helping the American imperialism, and so on and so forth. For the Jews, that was a very bad sign. Wow. If he can be summarily executed without any real reason, without anything really substantial, they could all get in trouble. And following in the next few years or so, many Jews left Iran.
Yeah, it's a long story, and it's
in many ways
it's our story of the Jews being in exile and coming to an end. And there's I hope a happy ending, in Israel. Last question. I know that your time is busy. It's interesting as I'm hearing you speak. I come from interesting background. My father's from Syria. My mother is from Munkach.
Wow.
And in both of those scenarios, the move to America, if you will, came earlier than the Persian community. 1979 is fairly recent. And so what's fascinating is that as we stand here today, there is a very I would guess there's a very strong connection to Iran. Munkach is already in its third. There are people that are preserving the culture of Munkach in America very well, but still the people that came from Munkach they have grandkids. They've got great grandkids, right? So when you think about touching down from a country, and you've got 3 or 4 generations from you, the diaspora experience in that community is much different than those that came 30 years ago. It's just a fascinating concept. I don't know if you feel that the oldest exile, if you will, is actually in many cases across the world the newest,
Right.
and the most connected to that source. I don't know if that phenomenon has any implications. I just wanted to note it.
No, I sympathize. I understand what you're saying, and it sounds, yeah, this is it. They are very much still those who moved outside Iran. You see them; they are still, in many respects, very Iranian, sticking to their the language. You have all you have to do is go to either Great Neck or Los Angeles and some other centers and see them. They stick to their language. They are proud of their Iranian heritage. At the
Sure.
same time, they are very, very Jewish, and they don't
Yeah.
forget that, and they never forgot that.
It's an amazing thing. Well, thank you, Professor, for spending the time. It's so fascinating. One of the beautiful parts about this show is that we really have the opportunity to show each other aspects about each other that we just don't know. And I know that from all the different backgrounds that we are blessed to be a part of as a Jewish people, we've gained a lot learning from you today, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching. For more content, like and subscribe, and be sure to tune in live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern at theshabbatshow.com or right here on YouTube.